She had always been a quiet child, the kind who blended into the background without trying. Most people never noticed her unless she happened to be standing directly in their way, and even then, they would only give her a polite nod before walking around her. She wasn't shy in a fearful way, just gentle, calm, and soft-spoken. She liked watching the world more than being at its center. She liked listening more than talking, learning more than showing. But there was one thing that stirred something loud inside her, something brighter than everything else she kept tucked away. It was music. From the time she was very young, she had been drawn to sound melodies from passing cars, the jingles of ice cream trucks, the gentle hum her mother made while folding laundry. But nothing ever captured her attention the way the piano did. Whenever she heard one, whether in a movie, in a commercial, or faintly from a neighbor's window, she felt a pull so strong she couldn't explain it. She would stop completely, listening so deeply that the world around her seemed to pause. At home, she didn't have a piano. She didn't even have a small keyboard. But that never stopped her. She found ways to learn without touching real keys. She watched videos, replaying them again and again until her eyes memorized patterns her fingers had never actually practiced. She listened to recordings late at night when the house was quiet. She sketched drawings of piano keys in an old notebook so she could trace imaginary tunes with her fingers. She taught herself to recognize notes by ear, learning their shapes through the way they made her feel. Still, no one knew how deeply she loved it. No one saw her late-night practice sessions or her small notebook full of doodled keys. No one heard her humming melodies only she recognized. To everyone else, she was simply the quiet girl who liked keeping to herself. One weekend, her town held a community event in the big hall near the park. It wasn't anything fancy, just a gathering of neighbors with small performances, food tables, and local artists showing their work. Families came with their kids. People set up chairs in rows, and the echo of chatter filled the room before noon. It was a cheerful, bustling place, and she attended with her mother, who wanted a simple afternoon outside the house. The moment they stepped inside, she saw it. At the far end of the hall, sitting under a warm spotlight, was a grand piano, the most beautiful instrument she had ever seen in person. Its smooth black surface shone softly, and its open lid revealed strings that made her chest flutter with excitement. She had seen pianos in stores from a distance, but never one this close, this real, this inviting. Her mother walked ahead, stopping to speak with another parent. But the girl barely heard anything around her. Her heart thudded in her chest, and she felt her feet slowly carrying her closer to the stage, as if guided by something invisible. She wasn't the only one who noticed the piano. Kids ran around it, not paying much attention, while adults chatted in front of it, waiting for the next performance to start. A few people sat in the front row, scrolling on their phones. The piano simply sat there, quiet and untouched between scheduled performers. She stood several feet away, afraid to get too close, but completely unable to look away. Every detail fascinated her, the shine of the keys, the curve of the frame, the faint marks that showed it had been played many times before. She wondered what it would feel like to sit on that bench, to place her hands on the keys, to let sound rise from her fingers instead of her imagination. But she didn't move closer. She stayed in the background, the way she always did, watching from a safe distance. As the afternoon went on, people came and went on stage. A teenager strummed a guitar nervously. A group of little kids sang a short song together, their voices uneven but cheerful. An older man played a simple melody on the piano, pleasant, but nothing special. After each performance, the audience clapped politely. Then there would be a break before someone new was called up. During one of those breaks, the girl found herself drifting nearer again. She didn't mean to walk forward. Her feet just did. Maybe it was the way the light hit the piano, or the quiet moment when no one was playing it. Maybe it was the feeling that she might never get another chance like this. Whatever it was, she suddenly realized she was only a few steps away from the stage's edge. A couple of kids nearby noticed her standing there. They were older, maybe 13 or 14, and full of the loud confidence she never had. One nudged the other and whispered not quietly enough, "What's she doing?" "She doesn't know how to play." Another laughed softly. "She's probably just going to press random keys." She felt their eyes on her, sharp and amused, and for a moment her courage slipped. She looked down at her shoes. Her hands curled in front of her. She thought about turning away, walking back to where her mother was. It would be easier, safer. No one would look at her. No one would laugh. But then she lifted her eyes and saw the piano again. And something in her refused to step back. She took a slow breath. Not a deep, dramatic breath, just a simple one, steady enough to keep her standing there. Her heart raced, but it wasn't fear alone. It was longing. A feeling she had carried for years, without ever letting it show. The announcer at the corner of the stage was busy talking to someone, and didn't seem to mind if anyone approached the piano. People walked past without paying attention. It wasn't a formal performance moment. It was just a pause between acts, a moment when the instrument waited silently. The girl stepped onto the first raised platform beside the stage. Then the second. She could feel the kids behind her watching, waiting to laugh again. She heard a few older teens nearby make comments under their breath. She felt every pair of eyes that turned toward her as she slowly approached the bench. She wasn't used to being watched. She wasn't used to being anywhere near the center of attention. Her hands trembled as she reached out and touched the edge of the piano bench. She hesitated, unsure if she should sit down, unsure if she was even allowed to. She glanced around, but no one stopped her dot, so she sat. The bench was smooth and slightly cool. She placed her palms on her knees, staring at the keys just a few inches away. From here, they looked even more beautiful. Crisp, clean, and lined up like a path she had been waiting her whole life to walk. Her heart beat so loudly she could feel it in her throat. She didn't rush. She didn't lift her hands right away. She sat there quietly, gathering the courage she didn't know she had. Behind her, the quiet laughter grew again. "She's scared. Told you she doesn't know how. This is gonna be funny." Their voices weren't cruel, just careless, the way some people laugh without realizing the weight their words carry. But even small laughter can feel loud when pointed at someone who's used to blending into the background. Still, the girl didn't move away. She didn't run. She didn't even turn around. Instead, she let her gaze fall on the keys once more. She felt that familiar pull in her chest, the one she felt every time she heard a piano, the one she felt late at night, tracing imaginary notes in her old notebook. Slowly, with a soft breath, she lifted her hands. She didn't touch the keys yet. She hovered her fingers just above them, feeling the air between her skin and the instrument she had wanted to play her whole life. The room hadn't gone silent, but she was no longer hearing the conversations. She wasn't hearing the giggles or the whispers. All she could sense was the piano, its stillness, its promise, its waiting. She closed her eyes for just a moment, remembering the melodies she had memorized without ever practicing on real keys. The ones she had listened to so many times, she could feel them in her bones. When she opened her eyes again, she felt something shift inside her. Not boldness, not bravery, just acceptance. Acceptance that this was the closest she had ever been to a real piano. Acceptance that she might never get another moment like this. Acceptance that even if people laughed, she didn't want to walk away without trying. She lowered her fingertips until they touched the keys. The cool, smooth surface sent a small shiver up her hands. It didn't feel like her notebook drawings. It didn't feel like the air piano she practiced at home. This was real, heavy, alive, her breath caught in her throat, but she didn't pull away. For the first time in her life, she was touching a piano. She sat there, motionless, unsure of what would happen next, unsure if she would freeze, unsure if she could make a sound at all. But she didn't move her hands away. She didn't stand up. She stayed there, touching the keys, letting every second settle around her dot. And although she didn't know it yet, the moment she pressed down, just a few seconds later everything around her would change. She stayed there for a moment, her fingertips resting gently on the cool piano keys, almost afraid to move. The soft murmur of the room drifted around her, but it felt far away, like she was sitting behind a thin wall of glass. The world was busy on the other side, but right here, in this small space between her and the piano, everything felt still. She wasn't thinking about the people watching her. She wasn't thinking about the kids who had laughed, or the adults glancing over with mild curiosity. All she could think about was how unreal this moment felt. For years she had imagined what it might be like to touch a piano, to sit at one, to feel the keys under her fingers. Now it was happening, and she felt almost weightless. But the room didn't stay distant for long. A few whispers floated toward her again. Is she going to play? Maybe she's just pretending. She looked scared. She swallowed and tried to keep her breathing steady. She didn't want to rush. She wanted to feel ready before she pressed even a single key. But that tiny bubble of peace she had felt began to ripple as more voices gathered behind her. A group of children sat in the second row now, kicking their legs impatiently. A pair of teenagers leaned against the wall, scrolling through their phones but glancing up every so often, waiting to see if anything interesting might happen. A few adults nearby seemed curious, though not unfriendly, just waiting. The girl lowered her hands for a moment and let them rest on her lap. She didn't want to draw attention. She didn't come here to perform. She wasn't part of the schedule, and her name wasn't on any list. She wasn't here to impress anyone or prove anything. She simply wanted to feel what it was like to play even a single note on a real piano. For years she had practiced in silence. No sound, no instrument. Only her imagination to guide her fingers. She had memorized melodies by listening, by watching others press keys she couldn't touch. Now those same melodies crowded her mind, pushing and pulling at her heart, begging to be played. But could she really do it? Could she sit here, in front of all these people, and press the keys without freezing from nerves? Would her hands remember the patterns she had practiced over and over between the pages of her notebook? Or would she embarrass herself, hitting the wrong notes while the kids behind her laughed even louder? She closed her eyes again, letting those memories guide her. She remembered sitting on her bedroom floor, tracing pretend keys on her bedsheet. She remembered the way she would lean close to her phone as soft piano music played, trying to catch every detail of how each note rose and fell. She remembered how she used to dream of sitting on a piano bench, imagining what it would feel like to be close, enough to reach out and play dot. Now she was here. Reality felt heavier than the dream. The announcer at the corner of the stage still seemed busy chatting, not paying attention to the girl. No one had stepped forward to tell her to get off the stage, and part of her took that as a quiet permission to stay. She lifted her hands again, this time letting them hover just slightly above the keys. Her fingers trembled, but only a little. She took another breath, and then another. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she had to at least try. Before she could move, a small voice broke through the air behind her. "Are you going to play something?" She froze. It was a little boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old. He was sitting in the front row now, staring up at her with wide eyes. He wasn't mocking her. His tone wasn't teasing. He sounded genuinely curious, maybe even hopeful. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. But his question stayed in her mind. Was she going to play something? Her fingers pressed lightly on the keys, making no sound yet. She didn't push them down. She just felt the small resistance beneath her touch. The boy spoke again, this time softer. It's okay if you don't want to. Something warm flickered inside her comfort, maybe. Or encouragement. Just a tiny spark, but enough to steady her nerves. She let her body relax a little and shifted on the bench until she felt balanced. She placed her left hand gently on the lower keys and her right hand above the middle ones. This was the position she had practiced 1,000 times. Only now the keys were real, solid, and waiting for her to bring them to life. She glanced around one last time. People were definitely watching now. The kids who had laughed earlier were leaning forward with interest, expecting something amusing to happen. A couple of adults paused their conversations and turned toward her. Even the teenagers who had been glued to their phones looked up for a moment. Heat rose in her cheeks. But she didn't move away. She told herself something quietly inside her mind. Just try dot, so she did. She pressed a single key. A gentle note filled the airsoft. Clear and surprisingly calming dot, she blinked. She hadn't expected it to sound so beautiful. It was just one note, nothing more. But hearing it echo lightly in the hall felt magical. That single sound washed away a little of her fear. She pressed another key, higher this time. Then another. 3 simple notes, spaced out slowly, almost like testing the water before stepping into a stream that the murmuring behind her softened. People were paying attention. She let her fingers settle on the keys again. Her hands were still shaking a little, but she felt something shifting inside her, a gentle confidence. The kind that grows not from applause or praise, but from doing something you've waited your whole life to try. She began to press a few more notes, this time following a pattern she had memorized long ago. It was a small melody, simple and soft, not yet the piece she loved most, but something she could ease into without too much fear. The sound traveled through the room, gathering the attention of anyone within earshot. The girl didn't lift her head, afraid that looking at the audience would break her focus. Instead, she let her fingers move the way they had in her imagination for years. Each note felt like a tiny step forward, pulling her deeper into the world she had only dreamed of. People continued to gather quietly. A mother carried her toddler closer, swaying gently as she listened. An older couple stopped behind the row of chairs, surprised at the unexpected music. A few children sat on the floor near the front, watching her fingers move. She played slowly at first. The melody was soft and peaceful, each note flowing into the next. She didn't rush. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply letting her heart speak through the keys. But as she continued, she felt her nerves settle even more. The tremble in her hands faded. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing steadied. Her fingers began moving with a smoother rhythm, following the pattern she had listened to so many times that the kids who had laughed earlier weren't laughing anymore. One of them whispered something, but the tone wasn't mocking now. It sounded more like surprise. She played the melody again, this time with more confidence. The piano responded beautifully, its notes filling the space in a warm, gentle wave. She almost forgot where she was, almost forgot there were people around her, for a moment. It felt like she was alone in a quiet room, playing a piano that had always belonged to her. The sound seemed to wrap around her, carrying her away from her worries, from the voices, from the fear of making a mistake. She didn't notice when the announcer finally looked up from the corner of the stage. He paused mid-sentence, staring at her with curious eyes. He hadn't expected someone not on the list, not part of the event, to begin playing during the break. But he listened, letting the moment unfold without stepping in. A few adults near him whispered questions. Who is she? Is she supposed to be performing? Did someone sign her up? But no one moved to stop her. The girl continued playing until she reached the end of the little melody. It wasn't long. It wasn't advanced. But it was played with a kind of careful love that made the moment feel special. When she finished the final note, her hands hovered above the keys. She didn't lift them away yet, unsure if she should stop or continue. The room stayed quiet, not silent, but calm. She heard a few soft murmurs. One child whispered, "That was pretty." Someone else whispered, "I didn't know she could play." People weren't laughing. People weren't mocking. They were. Listening, she felt something warm spread through her chest, a mix of relief and joy, something she had never felt this strongly before. She wasn't sure what she should do next. Should she play again? Should she stop now? She didn't want to push her luck, but she also didn't want the moment to end. It was the first time she had ever played a real piano, and the sound was still echoing inside her like a quiet promise. She placed her hands back on the keys, letting her fingers rest softly. Her heart began to race again, but for a different reason now, excitement instead of fear. And as she prepared to play the next part, she didn't know that more people were beginning to gather, drawn in by the unexpected beauty of the soft notes she had played. She didn't know that this moment, the moment she thought would be small and unnoticed, was slowly becoming the center of the room. She had no idea what was about to happen next, but she was ready to try again. She sat with her hands resting lightly on the keys, her heart beating fast, but steady enough for her to keep going. The small melody she had just played still echoed in the room, gently fading like a warm breath in cool air. She didn't know what the audience expected from her now. She didn't even know what she expected from herself. But she did know one thing. She wasn't ready to stand up and walk away. For years she had imagined this moment. Not the crowd, not the whispers, not the uncertain looks, just the piano. Just her hands. Just the chance to play real notes that belonged to something bigger than her imagination. Now that she finally had it, she didn't want to let go. She took a soft breath and placed her fingers into the familiar position again. This time she felt a little braver, a little more grounded. The fear hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had softened around the edges, replaced by something warm and hopeful. Behind her, the room continued filling with quiet interest. People who had been wandering around began drifting closer. A small group moved nearer to the stage, drawn by curiosity. A couple of older men stepped into the back row. A mother hushed her child gently before taking a seat. The crowd was growing, but she didn't turn around to see it. She kept her eyes on the keys dot in her mind. She felt the shape of the next melody. It was one she had practiced in her head for so long that she could almost see it like a map laid out in front of her. She wasn't sure if she could play it perfectly. She wasn't even sure if she could play it well enough for others to understand it. But her fingers tingled with the memory of each movement, each shift, each tiny detail she had replayed so many times. She pressed the first note dot. It rang softly in the air. Not too loud, not too sharp, just gentle, like the opening of a story. Then she pressed the next, and the next. The melody began to form, slow and careful at first. She moved cautiously, like someone stepping over stones in a shallow river, testing each one before trusting it with her full weight. The piano responded beautifully, its sound smooth and warm. Each note felt real in a way she had never experienced before. At first, she didn't dare play too quickly. She was still learning the feel of the keys, the distance between them, the pressure they required. But as she continued, something shifted inside her again, something calm and peaceful. She began to relax. Her fingers moved more freely, more naturally. The music, which had started as a soft trickle, began flowing with more confidence. The melody grew richer, fuller, stretching into small rises and gentle falls. It wasn't a difficult piece, not compared to the ones she had watched skilled pianists play, but it carried emotion. It carried the kind of quiet beauty that didn't need fancy flourishes to touch someone's heart. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. She wasn't thinking about the audience now. She wasn't thinking about being watched. The piano was all she could feel. Behind her, the crowd grew even more silent. Even the children who had been kicking their legs earlier stopped fidgeting. The teenagers who had looked bored before now watched her with new interest. Some people stared at her hands, others at her face, trying to understand where the music was coming from. One woman whispered softly to the person next to her, "She plays beautifully." Another murmured, "Who is she? I haven't seen her in the programs." No one had, because she wasn't supposed to be here. But in this moment, she didn't feel out of place. She played through the middle section of the melody, the part she loved most. It dipped low, then climbed again, soft but firm in its emotion. She felt the notes like steps beneath her fingers, smooth, steady, comforting. Each movement connected to the next, guiding her through the music like a familiar path she had walked in dreams. Then, something unexpected happened. Her hands seemed to remember more than she consciously did. They moved with a confidence she didn't even know she had, playing a small variation she had never practiced out loud but had imagined many times. It added a gentle curve to the melody, a little twist of emotion, subtle but beautiful. The sound made a few people gasp softly. She didn't hear the gasps, but she felt them felt the way the room seemed to lean in closer. She played on, letting her fingers guide her. She wasn't forcing anything. She wasn't trying to impress. She was simply following the music inside her, letting it rise and fall like breathing God. As she reached the final part of the melody, the room shifted again. More people stepped into the hall from outside, drawn in by the quiet sound. Some stood near the entrance, listening without moving. Others took slow steps toward the front. The crowd had grown large now, though she still didn't turn around. She reached the last line of the melody soft, simple and full of something that felt like longing. As the final note faded, the room stayed quiet. No one clapped, not because they didn't appreciate it, but because the moment felt too delicate to break with noise. She lifted her hands slightly above the keys, unsure what to do. She didn't want to play too much, didn't want to take advantage of this moment, or seem like she was trying to steal attention from anyone. She had only meant to try, just for a few seconds. She had only meant to play a little, but now that she had started, she couldn't stop. She rested her fingers gently back on the keys and took another breath. She wanted to play the piece she loved most, the one she had memorized with her heart, long before she had memorized it with her mind. She wasn't sure if she could play it perfectly. She wasn't even sure if she could play it well. But she wanted to try. So she began. The first notes were soft, almost like a whisper. The melody was slower than the earlier one, deeper and more emotional. It was the kind of music that made her chest tighten a little whenever she heard it. The kind of music that held stories inside its stories. She couldn't explain, but understood anyway. Her eyes focused on the keys as her fingers moved gently, tracing the melody with care. She felt the weight of each note, the shape of every small rise and fall. She let the sound guide her instead of fighting the nerves still fluttering in her stomach. Behind her, the room seemed to sink into silence again. People stopped whispering. Children sat perfectly still. One man lowered his phone slowly, forgetting to record the moment he had planned to capture. The announcer near the stage crossed his arms and watched her with a growing expression of wonder. The girl didn't notice any of it. She played as though she were alone. As though the world had disappeared. The melody grew more complex as she continued. Not difficult, but emotional, full of soft turns and quiet moments that made each note feel important. She added small pauses where she felt they belonged, letting the music breathe. Then she followed them with gentle movements that carried the piece forward. She wasn't following sheet music. She didn't have any. She was following feeling. She reached a part she had always struggled with. In her imaginary practice, the part where the melody dipped low and then rose higher in a gentle arc. Her fingers hesitated for a split second, hovering uncertainly. But then she let instinct guide her. She pressed the keys softly, following the pattern she had memorized from listening. The notes flowed out beautifully. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd, but not in a disruptive way. It was the kind of sound people made when they saw something they didn't expect, something that touched them in a quiet, honest way. The music filled the hall, warming the air with its gentle rhythm. She didn't rush the melody. She didn't try to decorate it with extra notes she wasn't ready for. She played it simply, but with feeling, letting each sound settle in the room. As she neared the end of the piece, her hands felt lighter, almost floating above the keys. The last lines of the melody were soft, almost like the fading of a quiet memory. She played them with slow, careful movements, letting each note linger for a moment before moving to the next. When she pressed the final note, it hung in the air like a fragile thread. She lifted her hands and let them fall gently into her lap. The room stayed silent. Not a single voice, not a single whisper, not a single phone buzzing. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint rustle of clothing as people shifted slightly in their seats. For the first time since she sat down, she allowed herself to look up. She turned her head slowly, her eyes drifting toward the audience, and she froze. The room was full. People stood in every corner, filling the seats, lining the walls, standing in the doorway. Faces of all kinds, young, old, families, teens, older couples, were all focused on her. Not one person was laughing. Not one person looked bored or annoyed. Every face held the same expression: surprise, awe, and something close to admiration. Her breath caught. She had not expected this. She had not expected anyone to listen. She had not expected anyone to care. She had not expected the soft melodies she played with trembling hands and a hopeful heart to reach so many people. A small wave of fear rushed through her, not because the crowd seemed unfriendly, but because the moment felt so bigger than anything she had ever experienced. And yet, beneath the surprise and the fear, something else rose inside her. Something gentle. Something warm. Something like pride. She had played. She had really played, and the room had listened. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if someone would ask her to leave the stage or if a real performer would step in soon. She didn't know if the announcer would walk over to her with questions. But right now, none of that mattered. Because for the first time in her life, she had S. The moment the sound of the piano filled the air, something seemed to shift in the room. It was almost like time slowed down for a second. People who had not even been paying attention before slowly turned their heads, first out of curiosity, and then out of disbelief. It was strange how quickly the mood changed. Only minutes ago, many had been whispering and laughing to themselves, thinking the girl had no place on that stage. But now, the sound coming from the piano made them pause. It made them listen. She continued to play with steady hands. Even though she looked calm on the outside, her heart still beat a little faster than normal. She noticed everything: the quiet breaths in the room, the faint rustle of someone shifting in their seat, even the sudden silence from the group that had laughed at her before. She did not look up from the piano because she knew if she did, she might lose her focus. Instead, she kept her eyes on the keys, letting her fingers move as if they had their own mind. As the piece grew more emotional, she allowed herself to feel the music more deeply. Every note seemed to pull something out of her, something she had held inside for a long time. She had been waiting for a moment like this, a moment where she could simply show what she had always carried quietly. She had never asked for praise or applause. All she wanted was a small chance to be heard. And now that she finally had it, she poured everything she could into the keys. The adults in the room began to exchange looks. Some seemed shocked, while others looked strangely proud, even though they had never spoken to her before. A few younger students near the front slowly leaned forward, their eyes wide, as if they had never seen anything like it. There was a boy in the corner who had been smirking earlier, but now his expression had softened. He seemed confused, almost embarrassed. He clearly had not expected this, but the girl did not notice any of that. She only felt the music. She felt it twist around her, settle in her chest, and then travel through her hands into the piano. And the more she let herself fall into the sound, the more confident she felt. The fear she had carried earlier began to fade. The memory of the laughter no longer stung. The doubt she had felt the night before, when she questioned whether she should even try to play, started to disappear. She reached a softer section of the piece, one that always made her think of early mornings when everything was still quiet and peaceful. Her hands moved lightly, almost like a whisper. It was this part of the music that always made her feel safe. She hoped it would reach someone in the audience the same way. She hoped that maybe someone listening would understand why she loved the piano so much. As she continued, she remembered the countless hours she had spent practicing. Sometimes she played in her room, sometimes in the empty school hall, and sometimes outside on a small keyboard when she needed fresh air. There were many days when she felt tired or when things in her life were a little too heavy, but even then, she never stopped playing. Music had always been her place to breathe. It was where she could be herself, without needing to explain anything. She thought about the first time she touched a piano. She remembered how heavy the keys felt beneath her fingertips, how she had pressed each one slowly, almost afraid to make a mistake. But the moment she heard the sound, something inside her lit up. It had been soft at first, but it grew stronger over the years. She always kept the memory close, especially on days when she struggled. Now, as she sat here in front of a crowd, she felt that same spark again. Except this time, it felt even stronger. She sensed that she was no longer the quiet girl sitting in the back, unnoticed and underestimated. She was someone worth listening to, at least for this moment. And that thought alone gave her courage. The room remained still. Not a single person moved. The energy in the air felt almost fragile, like everyone was holding their breath. The girl felt it too. She felt how the music was reaching people. She felt how it softened the space around her. She felt how it changed the way she viewed herself. As she moved into the next section, the music became more powerful. Her fingers pressed the keys with more strength, and the sound filled the room even deeper. This was the part of the piece that had always challenged her the most. It required quick movements and strong hands, and there were moments in the past when she doubted she could ever master it. But she kept practicing. She kept trying. And now, each note came out clearly and confidently. The audience could feel the difference. They could feel the force behind the sound, the emotion behind each movement. Some leaned in even closer, and a few adults glanced at one another in disbelief. It was clear that many of them had completely misjudged her before she played. The girl did not try to impress anyone. She only wanted to give the best version of the piece she could. She did not want to prove the people who laughed wrong. She wanted to prove to herself that she could do this, that she had earned her place on that stage, that her hours of practice were not forgotten or ignored. At one point, she felt her fingers slip slightly on a key, and her heart jumped for a moment. But she caught herself quickly, adjusted her posture, and continued. She had learned long ago that mistakes were part of learning. She did not let it shake her. Instead, she let the music pull her back in Dot as she approached the final section of the piece. She felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. She loved playing, and she wanted this moment to last longer. But she also knew that everything had a natural end, and she wanted the ending to be something the audience remembered. The last notes were gentle, but they carried a strong echo. She pressed the final key softly, letting the sound stretch out until it faded completely. For a moment, there was nothing. No clapping. No cheering. Just silence. She lifted her hands slowly from the piano and rested them on her lap. She still did not look up. Her heart beat faster again, but this time for a different reason. This time it was because she had done something she had dreamed of for so long. The room remained quiet for a few seconds. She did not know what people were thinking. She did not know if they liked her performance or if they were simply surprised. She wondered if the silence meant they were unsure how to react. But then something happened. Someone in the audience clapped. It was a single clap at first, soft but clear. Then another person joined, and another. Soon, the entire room was filled with applause. She slowly lifted her head. The sight almost made her breath catch. People were standing. Some were smiling. Others looked stunned. A few looked emotional, as if the music had touched them deeply. The group that had laughed earlier was no longer laughing. Their faces looked unsure, even guilty. They did not clap right away, but after seeing everyone else stand, they slowly joined in too. The girl did not look at them for long. She did not want revenge or satisfaction. She only wanted to remember this moment. Her hands trembled slightly now that everything was over. She did not know what to do, so she gave a small bow. The applause grew louder. In that moment, something inside her shifted. She felt lighter. She felt seen. And she felt proud of herself in a way she had never felt before. As she stepped down from the stage, she knew her life had quietly changed. Not because of the applause, not because people finally noticed her, but because she had found her own voice and allowed herself to be heard. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of something much bigger. The applause still echoed in her mind long after she stepped off the stage. She could feel the warmth of it in her chest, almost like a soft glow that followed her with each breath. It was strange to think that only a short while ago she had walked onto that same stage feeling small, nervous, and unsure of herself. Now something felt different, almost like she had grown a little taller on the inside. She walked toward the waiting area behind the curtain, her steps slow and careful. Her hands still tingled slightly from the final chords she had played. Someone passed by and gave her a gentle nod, as if to say, "Well done." She smiled politely, though she still felt a little overwhelmed. She was not used to attention, especially not this kind, the kind that made people look at her like she was someone to admire. As she continued walking, she heard footsteps following her. She turned her head slightly and saw an older woman, one of the teachers who helped organize the event. The woman had kind eyes, the sort that made someone feel seen without feeling judged. "That was beautiful," the teacher said softly. "You have a gift. Keep playing. Don't let anyone make you doubt it." The girl lowered her eyes shyly. She muttered a quiet thank you, unsure how to respond. Compliments were something she rarely heard, and when she did, they often felt like they were meant for someone else. But this time, she could tell the teacher meant it sincerely. She continued toward the hallway, and the moment she stepped out of the backstage area, the air felt different, lighter, brighter somehow. A few students stood nearby, talking in small groups. When they saw her, the conversation slowly faded. Some of them stared with wide eyes. Others whispered to each other in surprised tones. One girl stepped forward, someone she had seen before but had never spoken to. She looked nervous, clutching a notebook in her hands. That was amazing, a girl said. I've never heard anyone our age play like that before. I didn't even know you played piano. The pianist nodded politely, offering a small smile. She appreciated the kindness, but she still felt a little unsure about being the center of attention. She had spent most of her life blending into the background, and now suddenly everyone seemed to notice her dot as she walked further down the hall. She passed the same group that had laughed at her earlier. They were standing in a tight circle, whispering among themselves. When she came by, they grew quiet. Some looked away. Others looked at her with awkward expressions, as if they weren't sure whether to apologize or pretend nothing had happened. One of them finally cleared his throat and stepped slightly forward. Hey, you played pretty good, he said, his voice unsure. It wasn't the most impressive apology, and it wasn't even really an apology at all. But she understood the hesitation behind it. She knew people didn't always know how to say sorry directly. So she simply nodded. Thank you, she said softly. He nodded back and stepped away quickly, almost relieved. The rest of the group kept their eyes low. She didn't stay long. She continued walking, not out of pride, but because she wanted to stay true to herself. She didn't hold anger toward them. She didn't feel the need to embarrass them. She only wanted peace. When she reached the quiet part of the hallway, she found a small bench and sat down. She took a deep breath, letting the feelings settle inside her. It was hard to explain the exact mix of emotions she felt. She was proud but tired, happy but overwhelmed, calm but still buzzing with leftover adrenaline. She placed her hands on her lap, staring at the faint marks on her fingertips. She had always been gentle with herself when she played, but months of practice had left slight imprints that wouldn't fade quickly. She looked at them now with a sense of appreciation. They reminded her of everything she had worked for, every early morning, every late night, every moment of frustration when she felt she wasn't improving. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her thoughts drift. She thought about the times when she had practiced alone, the times when her hands slipped, or when she played the same part over and over until she finally got it right. She remembered the nights when the only light in her room came from a small lamp sitting on the floor beside her keyboard. She remembered moments when she wanted to give up but didn't. Those memories felt heavier now, but also more meaningful. They weren't just moments of struggle. They were steps that led her to this day. She opened her eyes again when she heard footsteps approaching. A quiet voice spoke from the side. Do you mind if I sit here? She looked up and saw a boy about her age. He seemed hesitant, standing a little too straight, his hands awkwardly stuffed in his pockets. She nodded, and he sat down beside her, leaving a small space between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt peaceful, not uncomfortable. Finally, the boy glanced at her. You know, when you went on stage, I didn't think much of it, he admitted. I thought it was just another performance. But when you played, I don't know. It just felt different. It made everyone go quiet. I've never seen anything like that. She didn't know what to say, so she simply offered a small smile. Thank you, she replied softly. He nodded. You were brave. I don't think I could ever do something like that in front of a whole room. She looked down at her hands again. I was scared at first, but the music helped. Still, he continued, you didn't let anything stop you. Not even the people who... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Not even the ones who didn't believe in you. She let out a slow breath. I just wanted to play. That's all. He nodded again, as if he understood completely. After a moment, he stood up. Well, I just wanted to tell you that. You did great. Really great. He offered her a small wave before walking away. She watched him go, feeling a gentle warmth settle in her chest. It was nice to hear kind words, not because she wanted to be praised, but because she felt like people were finally seeing her for who she truly was. As she sat quietly, a thought formed in her mind. It wasn't loud or sudden. It came gently, like a whisper. She wanted to keep going. She wanted to keep playing, keep learning, keep growing. For the first time, she felt like the world was opening a door for her instead of closing one. A little while later, when the hall grew quieter and most people had left, she stood up and walked back toward the empty performance room. The lights were dim now, and the air felt cooler. The piano still sat on the stage, untouched since her performance. She looked at it with a soft, familiar longing. She slowly walked up the steps and approached it. She placed her fingertips lightly on the keys, not pressing down, just feeling the cool surface beneath her skin. She smiled to herself. This was her place. This was where she felt safe. This was where she found herself. With a gentle breath, she played a soft melody, nothing complicated, nothing meant for an audience. It was just for her. A quiet, tender piece that reflected the calm she now felt inside. Each note echoed gently around the empty room, creating a peaceful stillness that wrapped around her like a warm blanket. As she played, she realized something important. The applause had felt. Wonderful. The compliments had felt. Encouraging. But this, the quiet moment where she could simply be herself and let her heart speak through the music. This was the part she loved most, and she knew now that she would keep playing, no matter what anyone thought, no matter who watched, no matter who doubted her, because the piano was more than just an instrument. It was her voice. Her story, and she was finally ready to let the world hear it. The room was nearly empty when she finished playing her quiet melody, and the last notes faded into the still air. She stayed there for a moment, her fingers resting gently on the keys, not wanting to break the calm feeling that wrapped around her. It was strange how different the room felt now compared to earlier in the day. Before, it had been tense and full of eyes watching her, some of them filled with doubt. Now it felt peaceful, almost welcoming, as if it understood her. She stood up slowly and closed the piano lid with care, making sure it didn't make a loud sound. Then she walked toward the edge of the stage and sat down, letting her feet dangle slightly above the floor. She looked out at the rows of chairs, imagining what the room had looked like during her performance. She remembered the silence, then the applause, and the way her heart had raced. A small smile formed on her face. It was strange to think how close she came to not playing at all. The memory of her hesitation from earlier that day echoed in her mind the moment she stood backstage, unsure if she should step out. She had felt so small, so afraid, so unsure of herself. But somehow, something inside her had pushed her forward. She wondered what would have happened if she hadn't found the courage to walk out there. Would anyone have ever known what she could do? Would she have kept her music hidden forever, tucked away in small corners where no one else could hear it? The thought made her feel a slight heaviness in her chest, but then she reminded herself that she did step out. She did play, and she did show them what she could do. That truth alone made her feel a little stronger. She stood from the stage and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing softly in the empty room. When she pushed open the door, she was greeted by a cool breeze from the hallway. Most people had already gone home. A few teachers were packing up papers and decorations. She nodded politely as she passed them. Outside, the sky had begun to turn a darker shade, the last bit of daylight fading into evening. She wrapped her arms around herself as she walked along the path leading toward the front of the building. The world felt quiet, but in a good way, not lonely, just calm. She reached a bench near the entrance and sat down. The building lights behind her hummed softly, while the cool evening air brushed against her skin. She listened to the faint sounds of cars in the distance, the rustle of leaves, and the muffled laughter of a small group walking toward the parking lot. She thought about everything that had happened today and how much had changed in just a few hours. Earlier, she had walked into the building hoping no one would notice her. Now she was leaving knowing that many people had seen her in a completely different way. She didn't crave attention. She never had. But she liked the idea that people saw her for something she loved, not for her silence or her quiet nature. A moment later, she heard footsteps approaching again, slow, steady, familiar. She turned her head and saw the older woman who had spoken to her after the performance. The one with the kind eyes. "I thought I might find you here," the teacher said with a warm smile. The girl smiled back. "I just needed a moment." "I understand," the teacher replied. She sat beside her on the bench, leaving some space. "You had a big day, a very meaningful one." The girl looked down at her hands. "It still doesn't feel real." "It will," the teacher said gently. "Sometimes the most important moments take a little time to sink in." They sat quietly for a few seconds. The teacher looked toward the parking lot, where the last few cars were leaving. "Do you know what I liked most about your performance?" The teacher asked, not the girl shook her head. "You didn't play to impress people. You played because you love it. I could see it in the way you moved, in the way you listened to each note. That kind of honesty is rare, especially at your age." A soft warmth filled her chest at the words. "If you ever want help," the teacher continued, "or if you want someone to guide you, I'd be glad to work with you. You have something very special, and it deserves to grow." The girl looked up in surprise. She had never imagined someone would offer something like that to her. She had always practiced on her own, learning little by little through videos, books, and by listening carefully to songs she admired. "Thank you," she said quietly. I'd like that." The teacher smiled warmly. "Then we'll start soon. But for now, go home and rest. You've earned it." They stood together, and the teacher gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder before walking away. The girl watched her leave, feeling the excitement of something new beginning. After a few moments, she walked toward the main path that led home. The evening air felt peaceful against her skin. She breathed it in slowly, letting the quiet fill her dot as she walked. She imagined the future, not in big, dramatic dreams, but in small, meaningful moments. She imagined practicing new pieces. She imagined learning melodies that felt too hard before. She imagined performing again someday, maybe not soon. But when she felt ready, she imagined a life where she didn't hide her music but shared it. The thought made her steps feel lighter. When she reached her home, she slipped off her shoes quietly and placed her bag down. The house felt warm and familiar. She walked to her room and sat at her small keyboard, running her fingers across the plastic keys dot. It wasn't as grand or beautiful as the piano she had played earlier, but it was where everything had begun. She smiled softly and pressed a few keys. The sound was simple, but comforting. She closed her eyes and thought about the stage, the applause, the quiet moment afterward. She thought about the new possibilities that now felt open to her. A calm excitement settled inside her. She began to play again. Not for practice. Not for anyone else. Just for herself. Each note felt like a promise. A promise to keep going. A promise to keep believing. A promise to keep growing. The melody she played was soft, gentle, and warm. It drifted through her room like a quiet whisper, filling the walls with a peaceful glow. And in that moment, she understood something clearly. The world had laughed at her once, but she had answered with music dot. And now, the world was listening. She smiled to herself as she played. knowing that this was only the beginning of her story, a story she would continue writing with her own hands, one note at a time. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. She just needed to stay true to the music that lived inside her dot, and as long as she did that, she knew she would never feel small again. The last notes of her quiet melody floated into the air as she finished, and the room settled into a comforting silence, a silence that felt full of hope, a silence that felt like a new beginning, a silence that finally felt like hers.